Good morning, welcome to 391F the Retro Session. I am Juno Logan and I'm a huge fan of video game commentary. Today's report focuses more on fan translation. Although the Western video game business flourished in the 21st century, there were many Japanese mixed media, especially in arcade game, that were not copied by developers. I am 20. So I didn't understand, I didn't know until the internet took over. But when fans realized that the modern era was disappearing, a new kind of internet culture emerged. This is a fan description. Okay, based on that, you now have an idea how just important a good translation really is. I took my script and then I ran it through many rounds of Google Translate to give you a taste of what video game localization sounded like in the good old days of the NES. So in good old untranslated English this time. Hello, welcome to Retro Encounter, episode 391. My name is John O'Logan and I will be your host for this deep dive into video game fan translations. Though the video game industry in the West has exploded in the 21st century and simultaneous releases are commonplace, there were many Japanese video games, especially role-playing games, that never got translated at all by their developers back in the 20th. As such, we never got them here. In fact, we rarely even knew they existed until the internet started to take off. But once fans knew that they were missing out on modern classics, an entirely new type of internet culture emerged: fan translations. This entire episode is going to be based on fan translations, and really, the real question that we're going to be taking on here, the biggest question in video game history, is Barts or Butts?
That is the question.
That is the question. Joining us on today's podcast are Audra.
Hello, hello.
Ben.
Hi.
Pete.
Hello, hello.
And Steph.
Meow, meow.
So before we jump in, the episode today is going to be entirely focused on fan translations, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite fan translations. Obviously, they're going to be very RPG focused for two reasons. One, it's RPG fan, and two, RPGs really were the genre that really got skipped over in the 20th century. There just wasn't the fan base there to support every RPG that was released in Japan until, of course, Final Fantasy VII came out, and then there was a gold rush. So before we jump into our favorite fan translations, I'd like each of you to tell me a little bit about your history of fan translations and when you first discovered that they were even a thing. Ben, when did you first discover that fan translations existed?
Yeah, so I first discovered fan translations when I was on Serenus Forest, the Fire Emblem fan website, when I was young, looking for ways to play the old Fire Emblem games that we never got here.
Yeah,
particularly,
of which there is a good mine of which.
Yes, about half of them.
Yeah.
And that was
There'll
in the
be more on
period
that later.
between when Shadow Dragon released and then when Awakening released. So it was a big, long gap where we weren't getting games. And that's, there's a lot of the fan translation projects for Fire Emblem specifically were coordinated on that website. So that's kind of how I became familiar with them. And then from that, I kind of branched out to other GBA translations and then other games.
Can a few of us vouch to having played a few of these Fire Emblem ones?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I played
right?
at least one.
Yeah.
At least one, as we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
That's neat. So obviously Fire Emblem is probably going to be a bit of a gateway. Audra, how about you?
I don't have a lot of experience with fan translations. I knew of them, but I didn't really play any until the PSP era, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And that was mainly because there were quite a few decent RPGs that just got overlooked over here. So I like the PlayStation version of games too, like Suikoden. I've always wanted to try playing those, and I knew I had to get a fan translation eventually of those.
Did you play that one?
I haven't yet. I haven't, though.
I think they did do it, though, right?
They did, yeah. The translation's actually not bad. They originally released one that was like not very good, but they went back and edited it, and it's pretty good now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Pete, how about you?
I think it's hard for me to remember which one was the first one I came across. I was not involved in the forums and stuff that had to do with translations. I think it was after certainly acquiring a perfectly legal copy of Front Mission for the Super Famicom that I...
Well, what other copy could you possibly get?
None whatsoever, but there was a handy legal backup that had been fan translated. And I played that and really enjoyed that. It's between Front Mission, Suikoden 3, Seiken Densetsu 3, sorry. So what am I saying? Seiken Densetsu 3 and Bahamut Lagoon. And I adore those three games.
Yeah.
And after legitimately acquiring copies of every one of those, I was able to enjoy them in my
I have
native
no
tongue.
sarcasm detector. I can't tell if you're actually meaning it or not, but for the sake of this, I will say yes, you mean it.
I think he does. I think he entirely means it. How about you, Steph?
Love it. Honestly, I don't even know. My brother was kind of like the gamer in the house, and it just kind of passed on to me. So I was playing Final Fantasy V translated. I remember just seeing it one day.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, "Hey, do you want to see Final Fantasy V?" I was like, "Really? It's out?" I was like a little girl at the time, right? And he's showing me this thing, and I'm just so astounded that it exists. And it was actually really cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. In fact, that was my gateway into fan translations. I'm old, and I heard of Final Fantasy V, and I was driven crazy that I was playing Final Fantasy VI, and Final Fantasy V was unavailable to me. And then I discovered emulation and discovered fan translations. And at this point, I think I was
legal
playing
backups, completely legitimate backups.
Yes,
Mike's going to be mad at you for talking about emulation.
Probably. ZSNES was the emulator I was using, and at that point in time, emulation was so basic they didn't even have transparency figured out yet. So I was playing Final Fantasy V, and they didn't have any transparency in the ship level. I remember
that
ship. So I think I've told this story before. I couldn't play it because I didn't know how to turn off layers at that point. So I was just like trying to figure out my way around the ships that were completely covered in non-transparent water for like
F4, baby, F4. You gotta turn off layer 3, F4. That's how I got through Chrono Trigger.
Mm-hmm. And eventually I was like, no, but I got through the whole thing without it, which just makes me proud. Although I hate that level in the future. I just have like PTSD whenever I play Final Fantasy V and that stupid water level. I'm like, ooh.
There's so many stupid like secret passageway areas in Final Fantasy IV, especially, where it's like little hidden vents that you could never see.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I remember having I literally replayed 4 for that reason. I wanted to find the secrets.
Well, let's actually talk about some of our favorite fan translations. So, Steph, we're going to start with you. What game are you going to be talking about this evening?
An oldie but a goodie. Talking about Tales of Fantasia, the very first Tales game.
Do you mind if I give a little bit of history about it?
Would you?
I would. So this was developed by Wolf Team and published by Namco. It was originally released for the Super Famicom in Japan in December 1995. As you said, it was the first title in the Tales series. It was groundbreaking at its time. Its graphics pushed the Super Famicom to its very limits.
They're still so cozy to look at.
A fully
today.
vocal introduction song.
Oh, and it's like so crunchy and gross sounding, but they did it. You know?
Yeah, it was amazing. There was a theme song. The game was actually a massive hit in Japan. It sold 1.3 million units, but again, it was
really?
never
Wow.
released in the West. And why is that? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but eventually we got a fan translation. Steph, why don't you tell us a little bit about the fan translation?
Hold on, wasn't it translated by D slur we're not supposed to say?
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I played.
So yeah, there is 3 kind of distinct versions, kind of worth talking about. Have they actually like done a proper SNES translation of the game, or I think all of the efforts just kind of switched over to the PlayStation?
I mean, there is a
as, like,
there is
the
a
bigger, better
SNES.
version?
There isn't. I played it on the SNES. I played the fan translation on the SNES.
Yeah, was it the DJAP one? Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not a slur because it's the name of the thing. Although
Fortunately, the name.
It's in poor taste in today's
Sorry,
modern
guys.
context.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the game has received, I think at this point, several official localizations, but this was the first time we could play it in English.
Yeah, so the first one on the SNES was kind of infamous. It really depends on what kind of like player you are. Some people like their translations a bit more literal. This one admittedly punched up a very, very dry script, a very vanilla script, but to the extent that, some people might find it a little bit too much and a little bit overbearing. So yeah, this is the one where the infamous Archie,
just say it,
bangs like a tiger.
That's not it. Say it.
So, when the question comes up, when you have 2 lady party members, and your buddy's like, hey, we got 2 girls around, which one do you like better? And it's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, hey, well, Mint looks nice, but Archie looks like she like a tiger.
Isn't there also a scene soon after where she's like asleep and she's dreaming about it? Yeah,
she's dreaming about sexy times
with class, and then she has a flat out
very
orgasm.
Classy. Yeah, it's
very something about Mary or whatever.
Very much, yeah. So there's like a few like kind of really racy jokes kind of scattered in there, and like I said, it punches up a pretty dry script. But I know like it's not really everybody's speed, and it's kind of aged a little bit. Like it's a little bit juvenile, I guess, or maybe the older you get. And it's funny when we were younger and just willing to take these kinds of things. But yes, they did a good job though. Like they even changed like a lot of the graphics, the script graphics too. So it's actually a pretty impressive effort for when it was.
Oh, it's mind blowing for its time. Actually, there is a fascinating article by Clyde Mandelin. I think that's it. Mandelin? Yeah, I think that's
Was he the one who was he on that?
No, but I do know that we're going to be talking about him a bit later.
Okay.
But he is he has a series of books now called Legends of Localization. He has a website, and he has an article.
Stuff, yeah.
He has an article focused entirely on the like a tiger scene and the various versions of it in various translations.
Oh, I gotta read that. I had no idea.
It's really
cool.
His work.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. I think I'll try to include I'll include a note in the show notes about it. But yeah, I mean, this was the first time I played Tales of Fantasia with this fan translation.
Yeah.
And I gotta be honest, I really liked it. Like, yeah, it was obviously very racy in places, and obviously had the imprint of the translators. They really put their stamp on this. But also, you kind of have to remember that SNES RPGs, when we look at them through, the nostalgia lens, they were pretty dry translations, really. Like the Final Fantasy games, I love them, but the translations, was it Ted Woolsey?
Ted Woolsey.
Yeah, it doesn't flow good.
No, it doesn't. It's fine. It works, but there wasn't a ton of personality in it. Whereas this particular translation had more personality in it than I think the SNES could handle. That's why you had to play it on an emulator, because the SNES could not handle like a tiger.
You're all over this one. Okay, but then it gets a little bit more interesting because, like, obviously we were denied the very, very beautiful looking PlayStation 1 version of Tales of Fantasia, and we got the very, very crappy Game Boy Advance version, which, speaking of localization, the official one we got officially translated Ragnarok as the word kangaroo. Somehow. So we were stuck with that. The graphics were bad, the sound was bad, and that's what we had. Meanwhile, the PS1, was a big remake of that game, and it was only a few years later, but they included like a beautiful opening theme. It sounds nice now. It's an actual recording, and not crunched for the SNES. The Tales famous skits are in this one, so the characters kind of have a bit more banter between each other, and there's a lot more, I think it's like they even have the grade thing already, and a bit more of the staples that Tales series is known for, and we never got it, and it's actually very, very pretty. It's basically looks like Tales of Destiny, but I think even slightly better because it came out a little bit after. Anyways, we never got it, and we have two very interesting fan translations of this one, and this is perfect because it's for both your types of fan translation players. So we have the Gemini one by Absolute Zero, which is a more literal and straight translation. So it's a little bit more flowery. It's a bit more literal. And then there's, of course, the Fantasian Productions one, which I swear to God took like 10 years to do, but the Mad Lads finally did it. And it's got more flavor text. And the point was that it was actually supposed to be a bit more like a Namco Bandai or Bandai Namco, whatever, translation at the time. So it is a little bit more punchier and a little bit, kind of silly at times. So it's like even the small things where it's like the Gemini one will be like, let's go. Whereas Fantasian will be like, let's go, dude. Or like, instead of, Gemini will go, don't worry. And Fantasian will be like, nah, it's okay. So there's a bit more personality in that one that I think, again, it might depend on the kind of player you are. If you want more of the literal and more perfect experience, go with the Absolute Zero one. If you want the flavor text, go with Fantasian. They're both pretty easy to find on respectable back channels. I don't know.
Wholly legal back channels.
And like I said, both of these efforts are honestly just leagues better than the GBA one and are absolutely still worth pursuing today. Let's see. There's actually a video on YouTube if you kind of want to see these distinct differences by Wizardman, who plays both the game versions side by side, just so you can see those kind of, discrepancies. But for my money, I'm more the Fantasian type. I like that kind of punchier dialogue.
Can I say that I'm actually a little bit surprised that no one has created a meme for a very specific audience of a poster of the 2017 superhero epic Thor Kangaroo?
Yeah, what's up with that, man?
How long were you sitting on that after I said it? You're just like
almost 5 minutes.
with your eyes just twinkling, just ready to say it when I stopped.
I really wanted to say Thor Kangaroo.
Just gritting your teeth.
Oi!
This is going to be great.
It was pretty good.
There's a kangaroo over there.
Yeah. I mean, Tales of Fantasia, it's a fascinating game for a number of reasons. First off, it's a pretty damn good RPG.
It is, yeah. Like, it's so classic.
It's got Street Fighter controls in it. I love that.
I know.
Yes,
the combat system was completely original. It like had fighting game type controls in it.
It's like the cozy fantasy sprite RPG of your dreams, and it still holds up nicely for that.
And one of the weirdest things about it, which is again something that I think we're going to be talking about a little bit later, it has a very interesting development cycle, which actually resulted in a completely unrelated game that everyone thinks is a sequel. Woo. At least at the time, everyone thought was a sequel.
There's so much alike. Like, I love the shared DNA between them. Like, you could just tell they're kind of long-lost siblings.
Yeah, it's they are long-lost siblings that have been fighting for many, many years. An epic story is involved in the development of Tales of Fantasia. A game series that is known for their epic stories is Suikoden. Now, obviously, here in the West, we have gotten many of the Suikoden games, and we've gotten the first one, obviously, the second one. I mean, I actually don't know if Zach would be on RPG Fan or remember if Suikoden 2 never got released. That's such an important game to him. And his love of RPGs. Now, there were a few Suikoden titles which we never ended up getting, and one of them is Suikoden Woven Web of the Centuries, which was released for the PSP in 2012. Audra, this is your choice for fan translation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Please educate me. I've never heard of this.
Yeah, I really want to know about this, yeah.
Well, it's kind of a spin-off of the regular main series, Suikoden, centered around the infinity concept, which they introduce in, I think, the main installments, and then it kind of carries over into Tire Crest as like this alternate realities.
Oh.
And so Suikoden Woven Web of the Centuries kind of takes that, and it's another alternate reality where the 108 stars of destiny are scattered throughout fragments of time, and they have to connect to each other using trees that they plant. It's a really interesting concept. It's probably arguably not the strongest Suikoden title, but it's interesting because it's the last one that they...
The last one we got, dang it.
Yeah. The last one we got, dang it. And,
Wow.
And it's actually a really decent PSP RPG, I found. I reviewed it for the site, and I really ended up liking a lot of what they did, even though they kind of condensed some of the Suikoden-ness of it.
Yeah, you reviewed it back in 2022. We have a few fan translations on the site, reviews of fan translations, and it's a little bit tricky to review a fan translation because obviously it's a review, but we don't really want to score the story because it's not the developer's original work, but we can, still score the overall experience. You gave it an 81. You really liked it.
Yeah, I did. I thought it was really...
Suikoden is always such a fun experience. There's always so much to go in on.
Even the worst Suikoden is usually going to be a good
Does it have like a lot of the staples? Like, can you get like a chef? Can you get like the drama guys?
Yes, you can get multiple chefs, actually.
Ooh.
Yeah. Multiple chefs.
So it has like a home base building thing then. Same as the other ones. Okay.
Yeah, there's a home base, and there's actually different time periods. So you have like... You learn from the older Stars of Destiny's various moves that then carry over into your other characters.
That's actually pretty cool.
Wow, cool.
Did they do a lot with that? Yeah, did they do a lot with it?
The combat was pretty interesting. I actually found it more interesting than some of the Suikoden games.
Well, we're just interrogating Audra now. Tell us about it.
Let me shine this light lamp in your face.
I kind of thought Tire Crest is more just kind of regular turn-based, and this one, it actually, with the learning system, it was kind of an interesting gimmick that I think.
I know it's pronounced Tire Quest. Whenever I hear it, though, I hear Tire Quest. Like, so we get an entire quest. Like, we're talking... Actually, you know what? That would be a really good transition into Ben's game. Maybe I'll do that next. Tire Quest.
You know, the TurboGrafx 16 also had Final Lap Twin, a Formula One racing RPG. There's also Tire Quests out there.
What? This is a thing?
Yeah, I'll tell you about it later.
There was an official right now for
that's what I'm
racing
talking about,
RPGs. Ben. Yeah. So
yes.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
There was an official translation of that one, so it's not relevant to this discussion.
Yeah. I'm also not even going to begin to try to... I realize this is an episode about fan translations, and in that spirit, we're going to be saying the English translation of the titles, because I'm looking at the Japanese version of this game title, and I am... Genso Suikoden, I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, it's like Sumu Gurashi... no, I can't.
No Toki?
It's a lengthy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to be... I have an odd feeling of Slowsley's listening to this right now that, like, literally just made him cringe with every single syllable.
He's going to record over it.
But it's fascinating. So this is, let's see here. It's a Twisted Phoenix game translation.
Mm-hmm.
Were the translators for this.
And they actually do a really good job of, like, supplying... Like, they provided a lot of information on how to actually access it and to do it kind of legally, like getting import copies. And I thought it was an interesting approach. It was my first time actually getting a fan translation, so I kind of liked it.
Yeah, that's an important distinction between fan translations for the SNES and more modern fan translations is there are actual ways to get your hands on these games nowadays. And if you can get your hands on these games, there usually is some pretty detailed instructions on how to use the fan translation for that game, rather than going through more under the table means.
Perfectly legal.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Nobody does.
I mean, you just delete it after 24 hours and you're good.
Yeah, that's right.
Genso Suikoden Sumugareshi Hyakunen no Toki.
Oh, that was
nailed it.
Nailed it.
That was poetry.
I love the word hyakunen. I don't know. It's just one of those words that sticks in my thorny side, I guess. I don't know. Just sounds cool to me.
No thorns stick in your side. Your side is the thorny part. Got it.
Mm-hmm. It's just this game just looks really, really cool. I mean, first off, it's a PSP game, so the graphics are considerably more advanced. It's the most modern of any of the games that we're going to be talking about today. There are anime cutscenes, which is again something that most of the games that we're talking about don't have because most of them are on.
I love that they do timing for like subtitles in these things too. Like efforts to like subtitle Japanese only games is actually really nice.
That's really complicated work. Good for them.
Yeah. And I love the opening theme.
Oh, when do they not nail it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of this, we already know or audience knows, but it's a considerable technical endeavor to do these translations,
Oh my God, yes.
It's not just a copy and paste of the text. Or localizing it and the linguistic effort that goes into that. In many cases, I know, in the case of all these games, pretty much, I remember stories about Bahamut Lagoon and how much of the actual game code had to be changed and how long it took.
Yeah.
It's a labor of love. They're unpaid. It's like crazy how much of this there is when so much of this is literally just unpaid fans doing this, to some of them to improve their own like portfolio and become actual translators. Many do.
And it's such great work.
So much, yeah.
Oh, like I say this with absolute love, but like the internet is batshit insane.
Yeah.
Like fan culture is nuts. And thank God in many cases it's nuts. Not in every case, but in many cases it's great.
To me, when you're talking about like a disc-based game, like a game that's so huge, like from an optical disc, for me it makes more sense when you're talking about modifying the game code of a cartridge. But when you're talking about doing it on a disc and how much data there is to dive into and fiddle with, that seems like completely magical to me. I'm sure. Obviously it's not magical. They got their ways. They have techniques. They're smart, all that stuff. It's really, really great. Well,
what's interesting to me is that many of the games that we're talking about today, most of the Super Nintendo games, for example, probably the PSX games as well. And I have no way of knowing this, but like they were designed by Japanese developers who were sort of making them for the Japanese market. Like, especially in the 20th century, localization to the West was in many cases for these RPGs an afterthought. It wasn't considered to be the most valuable market for these games. There's a very good reason why a lot of these games were not easy to localize. It's not just because they were fans or amateurs. It's because the games were not designed with user friendliness for localization in mind. I have an odd suspicion that nowadays when a game is made, there are probably the tools. It's much easier to localize a game because the tools are going to be built right into the system. But back then, oh God, no.
Yeah.
You see in a lot of even English games that they use the sort of like Japanese quotation mark thing, that kind of bracket thingy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just because, like I think they just use the same typeset as the Japanese characters.
Yeah, changing the font is not trivial.
Yeah. So they just kind of go and stick with the Japanese one that has English characters or stuff like that. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of even like official localizations famously that were stymied by those technical limitations. Like Muramasa the Demon Blade is a good example. So on Wii, when they officially localized it, there were text limits based on Japanese characters, and so they could only fit like a few lines of dialogue in the dialogue boxes. And so it wasn't until the Vita remake where they actually, Vanillaware went back and allowed for there to be larger amounts of text and put into the boxes. So the translation in the remake is much better than the initial Wii translation for that reason.
It's also a word economy thing. Like, isn't Japanese just better for word economy? You could fit more letters.
Definitely.
So like now you also have them to like localize get the script accurate, put it in, a way that's understandable in English, and then like make sure it fits inside of the dialogue
Cut
box.
half of it out, probably.
Holy
yeah, probably.
smokes.
Well, I mean, that's in many cases they had to do that anyway. Even in Japanese, the scripts for these games were so massive in their original forms that the version that we get in the video game is considerably scaled back from the original.
And
I never think about that enough. Yeah.
And pardon me for like backtracking a bit, but I mean, a major reason why Tales of Fantasia never came out was in the US was it was very, very late. But it was also a huge cartridge. I think it's the biggest cartridge for the Super Famicom, and that was very, very, very expensive. And so when you're talking about how much text you're putting into these things, that's more bits, that's a bigger cartridge, that's more money on the front end you got to pay for.
I'm still losing my mind that the game sold like 1 million SNES copies. I don't really know how much games sold back then, but that does seem like a lot.
Especially just in Japan.
Yeah,
right?
That's a lot.
I'll bet you Tales of Fantasia, if it released in the West, would have been $100 game.
I bet it would have been. And I bet because of that,
with the giant Earthbound box.
Like, I don't even want to imagine how much in that alternate reality where it got released in the West. Can you imagine how much a copy if it would sell on eBay?
Gee, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it'd be up there, I think.
Gross.
It'd be up in the ranks, yeah.
Yep. First off, Tales and Suikoden are both long-running series. I wasn't surprised that Tales didn't get a translation because obviously it was the first one. Suikoden, a little bit more surprised, but it also had to do with the
PSP.
The PSP.
The PSP, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. It was probably a lot of the platform it was on. A very popular series that was released on what was considered to be the most popular platform of its time is I am going to murder this. Gyakuten Saiban. So that is Ace Attorney, the Ace Attorney series. We got, obviously, Ace Attorney 1, 2, and 3 was released on the Game Boy Advanced. We never got any of those. When the DS came out, they made DS ports. We got those. And that started this series. And there was a spin-off to this series, and we got it. It was Ace Attorney's Investigation, Miles Edgeworth, focused on the prosecutor, the fan favorite prosecutor, everyone's favorite character. And it was, as I understand it, well received by fans and not a lot of other people. It did not sell particularly well.
Oh, really?
It sold fine.
Oh, yeah.
Ace Attorney is very static screens. You kind of investigate using the stylus on the screen. In Ace Attorney Investigations, it's much more like a classic LucasArts point-and-click adventure game where you can actually move Miles Edgeworth around the screen, exploring environments.
I'm an idiot. I don't know why I didn't make that connection when I was playing it. It's a point-and-click.
Oh, yeah, it's a solid point-and-click adventure game.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it follows many of the same conventions of the Ace Attorney series, except for the fact that there is, with some exceptions, no real courtroom drama. Everything takes place in the investigation.
Miles still works as a lead so well.
Oh, he does. He really does. I mean, in the game, it focuses on Miles Edgeworth. Dick Gumshoe, his detective partner, is in there. He has his own assistant, who is the Great Thief Kay Faraday, very much a Maya type character, who argues about whether or not something is a stepladder, because that's, of course, it was there were 5 cases. It was a great game. And then it had a sequel, and we never got it. So Gyakuten Kenji 2, which is now translated in the fan translation as The Prosecutor's Path, is a direct sequel to the first one. features the exact same characters. It continues the exact the same large narrative. It sort of almost picks up right after where the first one went off. And, it just continues the exact same thing. You collect evidence, you interrogate witnesses, you investigate the crime scenes in a point-and-click adventure game format. And we never got it. It just was never released here. But thankfully, fan translations.
The fans were on that like the day zero that game came out.
Oh, yeah.
They're one of those that's nuts about it, like some of the Falcom people are now. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was fairly obvious that this thing was not going to be getting a localization anytime soon. So a user, GBA temp user by the name of Oren, released the first English translation patch in September of 2013, which only covered the first 2 cases. And then over the years, more cases were released. And finally, by June 14th, 2014, a full patch with all of the cases translated was released. I played that one. It was great. It was really, really good. They were emulating the Capcom translated style. They did not put their own stamp on it. They really tried to keep it true to the original. So they had some really great pun names in there, as Ace Attorney is wont to have.
I like that they have ethics about them, a lot of these teams.
Yeah, they're really trying their best to be true to the game. Yeah. And in this particular case, I think they were. They really, really did a good job of this. And to this day, now, following this, there were 2 other Ace Attorney games that were that weren't translated. They were the great Ace Attorney games, the spin-offs that took place in the very early 20th century. I have a review on the site for the first one. I ended up, because I am very moral, I actually bought the cartridge from Japan.
Good for you.
Yeah, I bought the cartridge from Japan.
No doubt. Of course you did. Why wouldn't you?
We always
I have
do.
it on my shelf. I really like having it on my shelf.
Good.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and it was a great translation. And then, of course, it was made moot by the fact that Capcom did their own translation of The Great Ace Attorney and its sequel, which were excellent translations.
I have Bravely Default in Japanese. It just sits there. I'm just
it's great. Yep. It's nice. You're just
Looks
like,
good.
I'm an RPG fan because I have a Japanese game on my shelf.
Were those the Ace Attorney games that came out for 3DS too?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, they were. But now they're out on Switch, of course. So to this day, Ace Attorney Investigations 2, Prosecutor's Path, is the only Ace Attorney game that is not available in English. They released the first one has a iOS port. You can play it. It has like upgraded, detailed backgrounds with sprite-based animation, which looks a little weird, but still it looks okay. But no, they have not released this. They're going to at some point. They've got to. Capcom.
I think so. Yeah, they've been on fire for bringing all their stuff kind of back, especially for their series. It's whatever, they've done the whole series. They're going to do this one at one point.
Yeah, it's just sitting in the vault and it's done. And they probably, there's no way of knowing this for certain, but I would put money they probably have a mostly done localization sitting in a drawer somewhere.
Right.
And they just didn't, at the time especially, they just didn't see the point of releasing it. Now, I can't be sure about that, but I'm betting it's true. So at some point, they'll release it.
I have faith in it. That's one of the ones I have faith in.
Well, they keep releasing the packs, right? Like now they have the remasters of Apollo Justice's story, and they already have the Great Ace Attorney. So the only thing they have left is Miles Edgeworth, and
they're running out.
They gotta give us some more Ace Attorney games, Capcom, because you're really running behind there. Anyway, my point is, it's a really, really good fan translation. It feels like an Ace Attorney game. There are the puns of names. You have everything is in there. Some of the logic is a little bit weird. Like Capcom kind of sucks sometimes at making sense of using this piece of evidence at this particular time. So there are a few places where it's a little bit, but I can't really blame them because that's a problem with the game design, not a problem with the localization. So yeah, if you are looking for a new Ace Attorney game, if you've played them all and you haven't played this, I think this is worth a play. And this localization is solid.
Aren't most of Ace Attorney's kind of legal defense methods a little bit suspect anyway?
Always. The whole game is about perjury.
So if he's messing with logic or, using his charm to convince a jury or whatever, that whatever his twisted up logic is logical, then that seems on brand for the man.
It is. It very much is. I have a feeling that I can totally see if the
you just
Western
broke Jono's
version
mind.
The Western version of Miles Edgeworth, I can totally see him downloading a fan translation ROM of a Steel Samurai RPG.
Yes.
Well, moving on with that really, really heavy in-joke, I'm going to move on to our next fan translation, which is Ben. So Ben, you are going to be doing a game that up until you brought it up, I had never heard of before. It's called Racing Lagoon, or other, aka Tire Quest, I guess. So this is believe it or not, it is a Square RPG for the PlayStation. It was obviously never released here in the West. Do you mind if I just go through a little bit of history, Ben?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so super unique game because it blended street racing with role-playing elements. It's set in 1999 Yokohama, Japan. It was influenced by illegal street racing culture in Japan in the 1980s. Despite being a Japanese exclusive, it managed to sell over 140,000 copies. So we're not getting to Tales of Fantasia levels, but
what
not
is up
terribly
with that?
bad. Yeah, Tales of Fantasia. There's a reason why the Tales series is still going, and I have an odd feeling that those sale numbers off the top is one of the reasons. And the game was just never released in the West for a lot of reasons, one of which being it's about Japanese street racing culture, which I guess at the time,
don't
no
at me.
about.
Tokyo Drift is the best Fast and Furious movie.
Yeah, but Tokyo Drift was released a little bit after 1999.
Yeah, it was a little, yeah.
What, like 2004 or 6 or one of those dumb years?
Anyway, so it got an English fan translation in this is probably I think it's our newest fan translation. It was released
I have to look this up. I'm just looking up Tire Quest. What's it actually called?
Racing Lagoon.
Racing Lagoon. Is it like Bahamut Lagoon, but like are they being cheeky like that?
There's relation.
Oh my God.
No, there is not.
Yes,
what?
there is. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
this looks really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. So a fan translation was released in November of 2021. Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about this game and fan translation?
Yeah, so Racing Lagoon, it was produced by Akitoshi Kawazu of Saga fame. And it was the one of the earliest games written by Matomu Toriyama of Final Fantasy XIII and Bahamut Lagoon fame. And then it was also the first collaboration between Noriko Matsueda and Takahito Iguchi, who are known for collaborating on the soundtrack for Final Fantasy X-2. So it's a lot of firsts for Square at the time.
This is a big one.
Wow.
This is a big one, especially for a game that was never released.
Yeah, this game is beautiful too. Like I'm just checking out a GIF of it right now that doesn't end.
Awesome. Yeah,
It's
I've
so
seen
good
this
looking.
before. It's really
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way they captured like the nighttime city is actually very cool. It's like,
yeah, there's a lot of shots of like the PS1 polygon like cityscapes, very similar to what you would get in like Parasite Eve of New York City or in Front Mission, which is a more fictionalized modern setting. But this is particularly in Yokohama in Japan, so it's kind of cool to see Square like recreate, a modern Japanese city in one of their PlayStation 1 games. But
it's got a bit of that Ridge Racer 4 aesthetic, that kind of like flat coloring for some of it. It's really cool for the UI.
Yes, and honestly, I mean, Ridge Racer 4 is a great comparison because the soundtrack is kind of a jazz techno fusion, which is very similar to what you would get for Ridge Racer Type 4's soundtrack. And the driving mechanics are pretty similar. There's not the same like drift mechanics that there are in Ridge Racer, but the basic controls are pretty similar. It's in that kind of same.
I was hoping and praying that there was a drift stat you could grind.
So there is drifting is part of the driving. It's definitely a game that's heavily influenced by some of the 80s street racing manga. So things like Wangan Midnight or Initial D. If people are familiar with those series.
Sure, Initial D at least.
Yeah, so those are huge influences on this game. Actually, the car you start with is very similar to the car from Initial D, that white sedan with the kind of boxy frame. I forget the model.
Camry or whatever it is.
Yeah. So, it's you have your story segments, which play out kind of visual novel-esque, though with some FMV in there. And usually the character models are very interesting. They have very broad shoulders. They almost look like action figures kind of. And
with like a bit of that vagrant story, kind of like where they zoom in on it, pretty all right with it. Like they don't mind showing it up close at all.
Yeah,
that's
pre-rendered
so
models, and they're like very exaggerated kind of like features and proportions and stuff.
Okay,
and
I haven't seen this part. I haven't seen the models or like the CG, like the FMV part yet. Do you know about Interstate 76, Ben?
Isn't that the highway system that the people race on, basically?
No. Interstate 76 was an Activision muscle car with guns on them simulator based on the MechWarrior 2 engine.
Oh, okay.
And it came out in the mid 90s. And the cutscenes, it takes place in 1976, and it's all funky and whatever. And the cutscenes are all the CGI, but they're extremely blocky models on purpose.
They're like Tekken old school blocky.
Yeah, and they look incredible. It completely works. Am I getting somewhere close to this with this one, or like is it kind of stylized in a similar way? Or
it's more Square Enix looking.
Yeah, definitely more Square.
Okay, so so still refined. I'm guessing. Now I'm gonna look at it.
And anime-esque.
Yeah,
please take a look. Up some
You'll...
screenshots. Yeah,
this is so cool looking. This is blowing my mind. By the way, this has been a great.
Yeah, and it's super cool. I mean, you have your like map, and you kind of have like a top-down perspective, and you drive your car on the streets. It's a little bit isometric, so not exactly, but a little bit like a GTA, like the early GTAs kind of is how it looks like. And then while you're driving, from story point to story point, you can also get into like random battles where someone will drive their car up to you, and then you get into a race. And so then it switches to the 3D, political racing mode.
That is the greatest like mechanic ever.
That's so cool.
Holy smokes, that's so cool.
And when you race people, if you win, then you get to take one of their parts. And if they beat you, then they get to take one of your parts.
Oh, that's so cool.
This is basically like World Ends with You, but like, kind of the street racing version. But they adapted those kind of RPG mechanics really in an interesting way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By the way, I'm looking at the characters and they look great. It's so extremely cool Japan.
Yes, very much so.
Want to know what's weird here? It's okay. First off, I'm actually out of all of the games that we're talking about today, I'm actually most surprised that this didn't get translated and localized for the Western market, because this was very much during the period where Square was throwing as much at the wall as possible to see what sticked in the West. Like if you look at some of their output for the PlayStation, it's friggin' nuts.
I was going to say, just racers back then were big too. So I'm kind of surprised.
Plus, over here, that was about the beginning of maybe not quite the apex, but we're getting close to the apex of like tuner culture in the US.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but like,
it was huge.
I'm looking at some of the games that they released in the West, like Tobal #1 and Bushido Blade, and
but not Tobal 2,
Parasite Eve, and like tons and tons of games that are just like random things. After the success of Final Fantasy VII, they were like, well, I guess we see what else works. But a lot of them are published by Square, but they weren't developed by Square. This was developed by Square. Mm-hmm. So it's a Squaresoft developed and published game that seems like it would have had some crossover appeal in the West, and it just wasn't released.
So do people have this memory with me? Like I remember seeing this game literally just in a small little screenshot of an EGM magazine.
Yes.
Just in the tiny tucked away corner of like stuff that Japan has being made, but I don't know if it's coming here, and lo and behold it wasn't. But yeah, I just remember seeing it just that little bit, just the way the characters look is so familiar.
Yeah, the only reason I can think that this wasn't released is because it was released in 1999 and the PlayStation 2 came out the following year. So it might have been. It may have
cut
been
off at that point.
It may have been a Tales of Fantasia situation.
Yeah,
it has a lot of text too. So that's the other thing is that you wouldn't expect really from a racing game, but there is a ton of text in the game, and it's so you have your story scenes, but there are also scenes where like the races are being recapped, where you're like watching a replay, and then the main character has like an internal monologue where he's kind of like describing the feeling and it's very novelistic in the way that he describes.
I'm looking at
like
the overworld where you're just driving around going to like a hospital. And it's almost like old school like GTA where it's like, just that kind of very far away perspective like that,
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god, this is absolutely crazy.
So
Please,
this man
Racing
monologues
Lagoon.
over a recap of his race?
Yes, and
that's so beautiful. It's like the most poetic and kind of expressionistic parts of Tokyo Drift. I'm sorry to bring it up. Is there a love interest?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I gotta
Is it the one with all the pink on her?
Okay, I've got to bring one thing up. This is unrelated to fan translations. It's just something that hit me. When you're a kid, it seems, especially back in those days, it seems like game generations lasted forever. Like your entire, like I remember my early years were dominated by the NES, and then my preteen years were dominated by the Super Nintendo, and then my teenage years were dominated by the PlayStation. And it seems like those years last forever. And I was just looking at release dates here. Final Fantasy VII in the West was released on September 7th, 1997. The PlayStation 2 was released in the West in October 26th, 2000. It was released 3 years after Final Fantasy VII, which is blowing my mind because that's the kind of thing I academically knew. But the idea that the PlayStation 2 came out only 3 years after Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VII to me is like the earliest days of the 32-bit generation. And it clearly wasn't. It was 3 years.
Yeah.
That's freaking me out. Sorry, that has nothing to do with fan translation, but I was just looking at dates and being like, oh my god, my youth.
I mean, if you can make the argument that generations have never lasted longer than these ones we're in right now, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
God bless Nintendo with the Switch.
I mean, like, even I would put like PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 in just about the same generation. If I
Same
was
with Xbox One and Series X.
Yes.
They have so many shared titles, it's not even funny.
Honestly, at this point, the Nintendo Switch should have like a Guinness Book of World Records picture beside like the world's oldest cat and the world's oldest dog. Like, it just will not go.
When it got released, it should have been in there for the world's oldest chipset in a newly released consumer electronics product.
Pete, you're not wrong. When you consider that, oh my god, this thing is long in the tooth. Anyway,
and Super Mario Wonder looks so good though.
It does. Look
Why
so good.
doesn't the Pokemon?
Well, I would imagine that's because of development cycles. But
it kills me. It actually kills me though. Like, I just wanted to vent right there and then. Last thing I'll say about Racing Lagoon, the lighting engine for the lights on the road is actually pretty great for PS1
it's really
era.
cool. Yeah. So I do want to mention too the group behind the translation. So because that's almost as important as the game itself. In this case, so the main person behind this translation is a person named Hilltop. That's what they go by online. And I think that overall there were like 8 people consulted on this game. Some people helped with the translation. There was one person who consulted just on the cars, so getting like the parts and the technical jargon and everything correctly. But Hilltop is the main person, and he did all the programming and the editing. What's interesting about him is that he actually has a Patreon, and he's done a ton of translations. So his first translation was the Dr. Slump game for the PlayStation 1, and then Racing Lagoon was the second. And it took the group about 6 months to do Racing Lagoon entirely, which is a really short turnaround for a fan translation. I mean, some of the ones that you guys have mentioned, you know, took years, 10 years, you know?
Yeah.
So to do a translation in 6 months is really crazy. And they've done, him and then people that he gets to help him out have done a bunch of other games. One that might be interesting to our listeners is Aconcagua, which is a point and click adventure game for the PlayStation 1 with really high production values. And then right now they're working on Boku no Natsuyasumi 2 for the PlayStation 2. Which is the My Summer Vacation series.
Yes. Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh wow.
Is Tim Rogers going to cover that one?
Probably.
That's why I was familiar. I heard him talk about it for 6 hours.
Yes. Yeah. He did a video on the first one for the PS1. Yeah. He has a Patreon, so you can go and donate money every month. Which is nice. He said in the past that if he gets enough supporters on Patreon, he will stop his full-time job and then do the translations full-time. So
what a champ.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing about him is he has a YouTube channel, and he puts background information about how he's done the translations on that channel. So Pete, you were mentioning earlier like how difficult it is to do like disc-based games for fan translation. Well, he has multiple videos going into how he programmed and hacked the game to insert the fan translation and the kind of difficulties that come with that. Definitely recommend anybody who's interested in fan translation, look up his YouTube channel and watch his videos.
That sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to check that out. Can you tell me the name one more time? At least
Hilltop.
Okay, so
his YouTube channel is @HilltopWorks.
If you want, at the end, we could do like a roll call of all of the stuff we talked about.
Don't worry, I'll put together the show notes. I mean, I need to edit the episode anyway, so whenever I edit the episode, I always go through and make sure that I have all of the, okay, I told them I give them this, I told them I give them that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, well, moving on from racing now, we're going to a series that was not in first place when it was released in the West. Let's put it that way. So nowadays, Fire Emblem is one of Nintendo's most popular franchises. Obviously, this was not always the case. Fire Emblem as a series just didn't exist in the West at all. It was very popular in Japan, as was its contemporaries, the Advanced Wars series or the Wars series.
Yeah.
But these tactical RPGs were just never released here. This one, the one you're going to be talking about, Pete, is Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, and it was developed by Intelligent Systems and released on the Super Famicom in 1996. It was the fourth game. And it was a pretty big one, but, this is not a game we got. The first Fire Emblem game we got was on the Game Boy Advanced in 2003. So, Pete, why don't you tell us a little bit about the fan translation and the game itself, Genealogy of the Holy War?
So, I know very little about the fan translation or the team. I know they're associated with the, what's it called, Ben? Like the Dark Forest Forum or whatever?
Serenus Forest.
Serenus Forest. So I have the initial fan translation that was kind of big and popular was called the Repatriation Line. There's a repatriation, like a series of patches for the game by Dark Twilkitri Net.
Okay.
Translation Division. Yeah, that's what they call themselves apparently. There was a later patch that refined it a little bit. So this isn't like the bulk of the work, but that was by Garneth. I just looked it up just now, by the way. So that's extending my knowledge on the team that did the translation. I don't have much insight on how difficult it was, but this is an interesting one because this is the game that turned Fire Emblem into what we know it now. This was the first one in the series with the weapons triangle. It was the first one in the series to have support conversations that would lead to like stat boosts or like battlefield like bonuses. And it was the first one that had these support conversations lead to relationships between characters. And it's called Genealogy of the Holy War because it takes place over 2 generations. And so depending on who you pair up and who gains support with one another, the stats on their offspring will be different.
Ooh, shades of Dragon Quest V.
Sure, yeah, or like a lot of the later Fire Emblem games play with this too, in very, in my opinion, less than satisfactory ways. But
are you talking about Fates?
I believe I am, where they're like, "Oh, I'm coming back in time. I'm coming from the future, and I'm your daughter, or whatever." Like, get out of here.
I abandoned you in a dimension to grow up. Yeah,
none of that dimension nonsense. Actually, this is a really all these games are like political or whatever, and they have really strong stories, at least basically from this one on. But there's very little supernatural in this one. Yes, the love interest is like some supernatural dragon lady or whatever, and yes, like this game uses the supernatural as these RPGs tend to, which is they're basically a stand-in for something like weapons of mass destruction.
I'm also reading that this storyline does include massive elements of patricide and incest.
Yeah.
So I have an odd feeling that even if this... I have an odd feeling that probably would have made it to the West under Nintendo standards at the time.
Something would have been edited for sure, yeah.
I wouldn't make it to the West by Nintendo standards of this time.
Yeah. It's a pretty violent story. It's really cool.
Yeah. Not a whole lot of incest on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah. You're right. Now that I think about it.
Now I am thinking about it.
It is... What I like about this game, first of all, it plays amazing. It's very difficult. I think this is the most difficult Fire Emblem game that I've played. And
this one's hard.
The each scenario can take you sometimes 2 hours for like a single scenario, and
the maps are huge.
They're huge.
Yeah.
It's like you're taking over like 6 castles in a map, and to me, the way that it seems like is that each scenario is like a full campaign that takes you like a year or more to complete. And so there's like this huge kind of time scale that happens as well. It's really interesting. And it's got all the kind of obsessive compulsive, like, oh man, if I put this guy 1 square to the left, he's going to get demolished. But I put 1 square to the right, he can counter and like, he'll come out on top or whatever. And the story is really what caught me about this one, though. I mean, the fact that it's the first game with a weapons triangle and with relationships and all that is really cool. But the story is neat. The first half of it, at least, is really intriguing to me. I wrote about it a couple years ago for the site. The protagonist unwittingly finds himself basically invading all the neighboring countries to kind of his west and northwest, almost by accident. He gets drawn into this thing, and he becomes an extremely tragic figure who's basically trying to help his friends, but in so doing causes a lot of suffering for a lot of people and gets a lot of people very, very angry at him. And the time skip that goes to the next generation happens when he finally gets assassinated. I mean, it's a pretty high profile assassination. He gets like invited back home, and then the antagonist calls like a meteor strike down on top of him or something. But
Jesus.
Yeah.
A lot of people make comparisons between like Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire in this game, and there's a lot of reason for that.
And not just because of the incest.
Right.
It's pretty amazing. You have a good friend of yours who's kind of he's a knight, and I think he's a member of the royal family to a nation to the northwest of you. And he eventually comes down to support you, but as he does so, he's like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Why are you here? What is this? All this fighting about? Like, I'm going to help you this one time, but you got to go home." And you just can't. I mean, it all happens when your father takes most of the forces to go help actually this main antagonist character fight a war to the east. And so you're alone. Sigurd is the main character. He's like a noble like knight and military leader. And he is tasked with defending, just kind of being left behind because they are allies with the nation to the west of them. But the nation to the west of them gets greedy and is opportunistic and tries to invade at that moment. And so as they do that, they take away one of Sigurd's old like childhood friends, and he goes to try to rescue her, and that's how it all happens because he's encroaching all of a sudden. You know what I mean? He's basically he's having a military posture toward this nation that was their allies, even though they did it first. But
it sounds like there's a lot of politics involved, which there's obviously some politics in SNES games, but maybe that's the reason why the Fire Emblem games were never localized up until the GBA. Maybe Nintendo and Intelligent Systems just thought the West isn't interested in politics in their video games. Wow, that's a statement that's aged well, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, it is definitely heavy. Even though you're not seeing extreme levels of violence in the game, the story is very, very violent and really intense in many ways. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear why it wouldn't have been translated at the time. They would have had to change everything about it.
How is the fan translation? Like, does it read well?
Yeah, I find that it's fine. There's nothing that stood out to me as like, oh, whoa, or like no real big errors I could think of. All the support conversations are really nice, and as they get more and more cozy, they can get pretty beautiful. So
I mean, that's the thing about a lot of fan translations is that you can really put the word "they're fine" next to it, because the reality is that fans are translating it, and fans, although they are a passionate bunch, they're obviously not professionals, and in some cases that does result in a not tremendously polished product in terms of the localization. On the other hand, sometimes it results in something that is far more memorable. For example, Tales of Fantasia.
I wouldn't say this one in particular is unmemorable. I mean, the characters definitely pop. Like there's
okay, good.
There's a bard that you find about halfway through the first generation, and it turns out he's like a prince who's just kind of hiding from his responsibilities, and he's just
sounds familiar.
Is his name Edward?
his honestly, he's such a little
I was going to say the one from Trails of Cold Steel, Trails in the Sky.
Does he run away after every battle?
He has he has no good reason for doing what he's doing except for his own comfort. He's just a little like I like that I dislike him. He's a good character because I really, really don't like that guy.
Yep. Well, we're actually approaching, we're at 1 hour right now, but we're not quite done yet because those are our picks. But the reality is fan translations, there are a lot of fan translations out there, and some of them are very important to history in terms of video game history. So we're going to talk about some of those real quick, and then we'll do a very quick lightning round at the very end because it's only at 1 hour. We have plenty of time. So I'm just going to talk about some of the ones that I picked, and then we can talk about them briefly. So the big one, the one that started it all in terms of fan translations, is, of course, Final Fantasy V. So Final Fantasy V was developed by Squaresoft. It was released in 1992 for the Super Famicom in Japan. It was never released in the West, obviously, and there were various reasons why. Squaresoft thought that it was too complicated in terms of its gameplay because of the job system. It wasn't focused enough on the story. They just didn't think that it worked for the Western audiences. There was an attempt, apparently, to release it under the name Final Fantasy Extreme, but that didn't really pan out. Oh, also, who the fuck ever apply the word extreme to Final Fantasy V? Like, its antagonist is made of wood.
That's pretty extreme.
It's pretty extreme. So anyway, eventually it was released, of course, famously. It was released on the PlayStation in its first official English translation, that in a really bad port. But it started the whole fan translation thing because in 1998, fans took it upon themselves and they created an unofficial English translation of this game. And this started the ball rolling with the idea that fan translations can actually be a thing. We can take games that were never localized for Western audiences and we can translate them and then we can throw it up on the internet and people can play them.
You might say that the fans were no longer the butts of the disdain of the joke or whatever.
Yes. Oh, for those who don't know what the hell we're talking about, I suspect this is a minority, by the way, because this is Retro Encounter. The main character's name in Final Fantasy V was translated as Butz, B-U-T-Z.
Excuse me, his name is Butz.
Is Butz. Eventually, whether or not this is official, I think Square decided we're not going to name our main character Butz, so they named him Bartz in every official version of the game. But
cowards,
cowards, they're nothing but cowards.
Own it.
So, like I said earlier, this is my first exposure to Final Fantasy V. I really like Final Fantasy V. It's not my favorite Final Fantasy game, but it gave me something very different. An
absolute hidden gem to us, over here who had to wait so long to actually play it.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, coming from Final Fantasy 4 and 6, where your characters are locked into their classes, all of a sudden, having your characters be whatever class they want, that was crazy. And can you imagine the amount of translation work that was involved in that? Just like a lot of work probably went into this translation at a time when no one knew what was involved in localization outside of official companies like this. They were pioneers. So the fact that they didn't just do it, they completed it, they released it, and it started a real movement is kind of remarkable in terms of video game history.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the most, this might be a bold statement, but in my mind, it's one of the most important catalysts for game preservation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you are completely right, Pete.
That's actually very well said, yeah. Expands it to audiences they never even thought of. Who knew?
You still see a lot of like fan, interest in the game too, and like fan community around it. There's like the 4-job fiesta that people do every year, where they play the games
and stuff.
Yeah. They get randomly pick like 4 jobs, and they have to use only those jobs.
Or they do like an all white mage run or something.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so
all Geomancer.
The randomizer has really taken over. It's great. Yeah, the Geomancer.
Sorry, that just reminded me of a prior podcast with Audra.
Do you think that Demon Souls would have released here if not for fan translation?
Was it fan translated?
No. But I'm saying like a game like that.
I don't think a lot of things would have released here if not for fan translation.
I think that a lot of games we got eventually are because of interest in them that are because of fan translation.
Yeah, Pete, that's a good point, because like Demon Souls actually, prior to it getting officially localized by Atlas, because Sony famously passed up on it, it actually had like a pretty big fan following in the West prior to even being localized, where people were importing the Japanese version or the Asian version.
Yeah, I think there was an Asian English language version back then.
Yeah, like the Korean and Asian region release. And so people were playing it, and that is part of why Atlas decided to pick it up.
I think a lot of fan translations showed companies that, oh, hey, there's money on the table. Why aren't we taking it?
Crazy. When you localize things and sell them, we make money.
Yeah, you'd think. Well, here's the thing, though. You would think that a company would look at a table and say, "Hey, there's money there. I want that money." But Nintendo still hasn't released Mother 3 yet. So let's talk about Mother 3, which I would argue, aside from Final Fantasy V, is probably the most famous of fan translations.
Pretty sure Clyde straight up offered the script. He said, take it if it actually means it'll be released.
Well, Mother 3 is a sequel to Earthbound, of course. It was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2006 in Japan. It's a third entry in the Mother series. It has a crazy development cycle that started on the Super Famicom as a direct sequel to Mother 2. And then
it briefly stepped foot in the Nintendo 64, didn't it?
That's true.
It did, yeah. And then they moved it to the 64DD, which clearly didn't get released.
Disk drive?
Mm-hmm. It got canceled, and then it got actually, there's... Who are you kidding, Pete? If this thing got released on the 64DD, we still wouldn't have got it. Except they would have had a good reason then.
Well, I'm saying it would have saved the 64DD. I mean, yeah.
Maybe. Anyway, it was canceled, and then it restarted, and it was insane. And it was a critical commercial success in Japan, but was never released outside of the country. It has become a massive meme at this point in Nintendo circles, with Reggie constantly being asked about Mother 3 for like the entire time he was at Nintendo. And the game just was never released. It was never officially translated. However, there is a fan translation led by Clyde Tomato. Tomato? Actually, that's the question.
Let's call the whole thing off.
I think it's Tomato, right? Isn't that how he goes?
Tomato. Yeah. Yes. So anyway, he was the lead translator, I believe. And he was a professional, and they went at it. They spent, apparently, according to my research, thousands of hours hacking the game data, translating 1,000 pages of scripted dialogue. Allegedly, they had some support from the highest levels of Nintendo of America. That is clearly unofficial. And the theoretical freelancing cost of the translation is estimated to be at around $30,000, the amount of time and effort and money that went into translating this. So yeah, this thing exists. I am on record as not liking Earthbound. I've never beaten it. I tried again this year. I stalled 3/4 of the way through. I just don't like it. So there's a good chance I'm never going to play Mother 3, but that's not saying that I don't appreciate Mother 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People keep talking about how much they cry playing Mother 3. I've never played it, but...
Has anyone here played Mother 3?
I watched a Let's Play of it. That was really good.
Did you cry?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there is some content in Mother 3 that I think is probably the reason why it's never been officially localized.
Yeah, I've heard the same.
Yeah. It's not even really like... I wouldn't necessarily say it's like super objectionable content, but it's just something that...
Is it incest?
No. I mean, it's not even... Yeah, right. It's not like even to that degree.
Hey, man, Genealogy of the Holy War is good, okay?
The what is it? Magypsies are very loaded.
Yeah.
Are
right.
very heavily loaded.
Yes.
I kind of believe in just kind of like F it and just like pull through and just kind of do it anyway, as is, or some discretion.
At some point, I honestly believe that at some point Nintendo will go back and they will release it. And frankly speaking, if they don't invite Reggie back to announce it, they can go to hell. I don't want it if Reggie is not announced.
That would be beautiful if they invite him on for a Nintendo Direct. It's like a special, special thing from a special guest, and it's Reggie to finally friggin' announce it.
For a 10 out of 10 announcement, you got to bring Clyde up with him.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. But with the Reggie joke, it writes itself. You just literally have him do, one of the people do the Switch snap thing, and then just Reggie just like pops into existence. He's like, what the hell? And they're like, hey, Reggie, you're here to announce something. And he's like, I am. And he could like act like an idiot, like he doesn't know why he's there. And then they tell him why. And he's like, I get to do it? It'd be very funny.
It would be amazing. And he would say,
do you need a PR team? Hire us today.
He'll say the very last title for Nintendo Switch will be...
That would be poetic.
That would sell 10,000 more Nintendo Switches.
Probably.
Obviously, easily. Minimum.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mother 3, Game Boy Advance, it looks like a Super Nintendo game because that's what the Game Boy Advance really is. It's a handheld Super Nintendo game. But to finish it off...
A little bit better,
It's got more bits.
A little bit better.
Yeah.
It's got more bits. Doesn't have as good sound chip. let's talk about, just to finish this off, 2 other SNES RPGs, one Squaresoft, one not. Because this is Retro Encounter and it's Solosi's podcast, can we really not talk about Seiken Densetsu 3? Like, we
absolutely no, we cannot not talk about Seiken Densetsu 3.
We kind of have to. We kind of have to at this point. So, Seiken Densetsu 3, or Trials of Mana. It was published by Squaresoft and released in 1995 for the Super Famicom. It was the 3rd installment of the Mana series. It was a sequel to 1993's Secret of Mana, or Seiken Densetsu 2. It was, exclusive to Japan again. It was around the end of the SNES life cycle, I guess. Secret of Mana was very well received in the West, but I guess it wasn't received well enough.
It was too late.
It was too late.
And it was a huge cartridge as well, so...
Yeah, it was at the very end of the cycle, and cartridges were expensive.
Very buggy, and things didn't work properly, so that might also play a part in it. Yeah.
How is a game that fun, that unstable? It's true. It's really amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, there were a lot of reasons it wasn't released here. However, that doesn't mean that it stayed in Japan, because after the success of Final Fantasy V, of course, more fan translation projects got put into action, and Seiken Densetsu 3 was translated in 1999. It was obviously an unofficial patch, and yeah, that was the only way to play it up until June of 2019, when it was officially localized and released as part of the Collection of Mana collection for the Nintendo Switch. When that happened, I honestly hope that someone checked on Solosi.
Yeah. I loved that, I was very, very happy.
Oh, yeah.
I love Trials of Mana. And the kind of updated version's really nice.
It's a great game with great replayability. Yeah, it's so cozy. It's so beautiful. It sounds good. It plays nicely. You could play with friends. Like, it's a perfect package.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very good. I've actually played some of this. I haven't played the entire thing, but I played some of it. It's a very good fan translation too. It's probably one of the highest quality fan translations that were released up to that point.
I played through that version. It's really good.
Was that an Aeon Genesis translation, or?
According to my research, it was led by Neil Corlett. No. And I mean, this is obviously Trials of Mana. You can get it in the Collection of Mana collection, but you can also get it as a standalone remake. It's a a modern looking remake. I have not played the remake. Has anyone played the remake?
That's what I was referring to earlier. It's very good.
Yeah, the remake's great.
Good. Interesting. Would you recommend it over the original SNES version?
Yeah, there are more.
Or are they just different creatures?
There are more class changes and stuff, and there's like kind of the story is fleshed out. I actually think the SNES version of the story is very, very, very thin. The appeal of that game is how fun it is to play, in my opinion, and the class system's awesome.
The Mana games don't really have a robust story.
Sure, but there's more, at least, like characterization and a little more detail in the story in the remake. And
like, show it.
Yeah, I think it's worth playing both, especially because like the game is so designed around replaying. So you could play the original with one party. And
I always felt like
different party for the remake.
I always felt like Seiken Densetsu 3 was like the Call of Duty of Square JRPGs. It's really fast. It's really, really fun. It's short. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's viable too.
The remake taking out the co-op, though, I think was a sour note for quite a few people. But I think most people got around it because it is actually a very tight experience. But yeah, it just sucks not to have co-op.
I didn't even realize that, to be honest. And that sucks. That's a shame.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is very true. It was a very different gaming experience than I think audiences of the West expected from, especially RPGs at the time. RPGs, even then, had expectations of being frigging massive games because their expectations were based on, like, especially after then, Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. So the idea that this thing would be short for a lot of people would be tricky. And then, of course, the idea of replayability of the game may not have factored in at the time for Western audiences. Or at least I expect that's what Squaresoft thought. Who knows if that would have been true or not.
I think it's probably more a financial thing, just releasing this enormous cartridge with all the localization effort at the end of the life of the SNES.
They wanted to work on PS1 stuff and post-haste, I guess. I don't know.
And they did.
Yeah.
Speaking of another title at the end of the Super Nintendo life cycle, sort of, and this is related to Steph, your game, talking about Tales of Fantasia. We're going to be talking about Star Ocean. So,
that was fine. There's two I want to talk about now, but yeah, Star Ocean, the SNES one. I still stand by this. The SNES Star Ocean 1 does more as a SNES game than the PSP one does as a PSP game, where it's basically just a Star Ocean 2 redraw and like copy paste over.
Yeah.
It infuriates me. I hate that. Like, the mountain that you visit at the beginning, Mount Metox, is this beautiful, lush, gorgeous, pixelated place on the SNES, and it's a dry-ass mountain on the PSP with one brown color.
But then there's like those herbs at the top of it or whatever, right? It's like, it's brown, except these herbs grow here to make everyone not stone.
It's so sad.
Well, Star Ocean was released in July of 2016 for the Super Famicom, again, only in Japan.
What year? 95 or 6?
96, I think.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, that would have been a cutoff point, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, it was
well
released
into
by
the PlayStation's life in the West, yeah.
It was released by Tri-Ace, and it wasn't a spin-off of Star Ocean, but it sort of was, because the developers of Star Ocean, the Wolf Team, they left Namco due to a variety of creative disputes. There were apparently staff cuts. There were significant changes to Fantasia. So they went off, formed Tri-Ace, and then made a game exactly like Tales of Fantasia. It looks like Tales of Fantasia.
They showed them.
Yeah, they really did. It looks like Tales of Fantasia. It plays a lot like Tales of Fantasia. It doesn't have any time travel, but it has space travel. And I mean,
that's the other dimension.
It shares a lot of DNA with Tales of Fantasia. For obviously, also it has voice acting again, which is crazy for the Super
English
Nintendo.
Voice acting.
Yep, and it was never officially released outside of Japan. Fan translation, enter. Fans took it over. The fan translation patch was released in 2003. And again, it was much like Tales of Fantasia, a massive effort because it didn't only requiring translating the text. It was also, there was a lot that went into this game. I played this fan translation for the Super Nintendo. I loved it. I thought Star Ocean was awesome, and not just because I was a Star Trek fan.
The crazy thing about this translation is that they took that voice acting and re-recorded it in Japanese. It's so wild.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That's crazy.
No, I'm joking. Sorry. That was bad. You can cut that. That was a bad joke. I'm so sorry.
Oh my god.
So sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm too gullible for that. That is funny. I was like, wow. I hate you now.
Feel free to cut that. I did not expect it to go down like that.
Pete, it went down way better than Thor Kangaroo.
No way. So. Thor Kangaroo. I like the kangaroo, man. I like that one too.
It's a very good, it's a solid friggin' fan translation. It doesn't include the, shall we say, the spiciness of Tales of Fantasia, but it's pretty damn good. It does the job. It has a lot of character to it. And it displayed interest in a game that was unreleased in the West, and is probably one of the main reasons why we still get Star Ocean games, for the better or for the worse.
Star Ocean, the second story. Where was the first story? We don't know.
Yes, and I mean, obviously it's still coming out, and lots of things are... Star Ocean is still a very popular series, despite a lot of disappointments in recent years. But that's beside the point.
Everyone,
this game is not a disappointment.
Go buy Star Ocean 2R for the love of God and everybody and anything
Steph.
out there that you love. Cookies, spaghetti, puppies, probably anything. Just go play it. We deserve more sci-fi fantasy stuff. It's really cool.
Space is better than old. Let it be said.
Yeah. I stand by that. I like my sci-fi RPGs a little better than the fantasy ones these days.
Now, the nice thing about Star Ocean is that it has both.
Yeah, win-win.
Yeah, for my money, Star Ocean way better than Tales. Way better.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay.
That's a loaded one, but I agree.
I respect the opinion a lot. That's
heavy
it boils down to taste. I mean, it's the same game. It's not the same game, but it looks and plays like the same game.
There's so many more Tales games, and there's like a lot of bad Star Ocean games when there's only 6 or 7 of them.
John, I got 2 words for you though. Item creation. Okay.
I know, the best. It's the best.
That's
God.
And like 3 just got mean with it, and I loved it. I loved it so much.
So we have to continue now because there are so many other games that we could talk about. I just want to list some of the other fan translations that are available out there, and then I open the floor to allow you to mention some of your favorites. So, oh God, I can still not pronounce this game, and it has an official stupid translation at this point. Is it Live Alive?
Oh yeah, who knows? Live Alive.
Oh, I'm not
Yes,
sure.
it's Live Alive. It's Live Alive. It has to be Live Alive. So yeah, Live Alive for the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom was never released here. Got a fan translation. Great game. I played it.
So good.
Now has an official remake, and please play it because it looks pretty damn awesome.
Pretty game.
Yeah. Bahamut's Lagoon.
Give me some of that. I love Bahamut's Lagoon so much.
Yep, it's a turn-based strategy JRPG from Squaresoft. It looks like Final Fantasy VI if all of the Final Fantasy VI characters lost a lot of weight. Everyone is very skinny in this game.
The main guy's named Boo. Oh yeah, part. The rest of it's great.
There's a Y in there, and also you can break bridges and you can light forests on fire. This game is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
You can there's like places where you can break dams and flood areas. Oh my gosh, great!
It's
great
so
tactics
pretty
RPG.
too.
Yes, it is.
Oh my goodness.
The battles take too long, but just press fast forward on the totally legitimate and legal way that you're playing these backups.
Mm-hmm. I will guarantee that within the next 4 or 5 years, this game will be released in a full English translation because Squaresoft is starting to run out of old games that they've never released.
That they're doing HD 2D stuff with all of it, I'm all for it.
That would
Bring
be
it just
awesome. I didn't even consider that. I would not allow myself. Anyway, keep going.
Speaking of final Squaresoft RPGs, Treasure of the Rudras, which was the last Squaresoft JRPG for the Super Nintendo, which was never released here, had a very interesting magic creation system where you could
translate that. I don't even know what wizardry they did for that.
I know, the fan translation, you basically combined characters together to create new spells, and somehow they did it the fans did it in English, which is nuts.
Awesome.
They actually give you keywords like Lifa, which is like a restorative spell, right? Like you can see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool.
But that game is really, really cool. Like nobody talks about it because obviously we did get it here. But like when I sat down with that and I played it for like, I don't know, maybe 4 days or something like that and just sat with it, my jaw was just kind of hanging low. Some
it's
of the
pretty looking
most
game.
Beautiful boss sprite work especially I've ever seen. It's so cool looking. There's 3 scenarios plus a 4th bonus one, so you get your Live Alive or your split perspective scenario kind of thing, and it's about like the last like 13 days before the end of the world, and you're like 3 different parties are kind of going about their own way to solve the bigger problem and stop the end of the world. Like how cool is that?
We also have, continuing on SNES RPGs that are not Square, but are Enix, we have Dragon Quest V and Dragon Quest VI, which neither one got an English release initially until the DS remakes, and both of them got fan translations, and both of them are pretty damn good fan translations. That's how I first played Final Fantasy, or that's how I first played Dragon Quest V and VI.
Yep.
Here's an interesting one for those of you visual novel fans out there. Have you ever played Snatcher for Sega CD? Well, it got a spiritual successor called Police Knots for the Saturn, and it was never released here in the West, but there is a fan translation of it.
Honestly, going into the VN rabbit hole would be its own episode. There are a lot of fan translations for that.
Yeah, it's on the PS1 also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any honorable mentions they want to toss in?
I have maybe the most infamous fan translation graveyard that I know of. So if you'll allow me, this game was not successfully translated yet. I hear that there is a translation going on right now currently. It is the Dreamcast opus Segagaga, which you guys heard of Segagaga?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was trying to play it with my Google Lens just last night. I'd heard a thing about it. It's absolutely nuts. Let's see. Let me try to blaze through this. You go to work at Sega as Sega and the game industry are dying. That's what has explained to you. And you go into these enormous security shutters where the development teams have been for 20 years stranded inside of these like prisons inside of Sega. And you're told that they're no longer human. They've lost all humanity because of crunch. And you have to go in and recruit people in there, and you do so through RPG battles in which you insult each other until you persuade them to join your dev team. And then you have to negotiate their contract afterwards. And you have 10 seconds to negotiate their contract. And they're so text heavy that, I'm trying to play it, and I don't have enough time for my Google Lens to translate what it's seeing. And so I'm giving away like company cars and like way too much salary. And I'm just getting these people on my dev team, probably blowing all my budget on them. And it is a crazy commentary and a weirdly honest look on like the travails of Sega as they were beginning to cease to be Sega as we knew it back then. And it speaks really openly in a strange way about like crunch and the culture of game development at the time, where people, they're like, at first they were sleeping under their desks and then they just kind of stayed there, and now they're just like zombies making games, and they deposit the game through the security door and we just give them food.
Oh my god.
And all the while, it's like a cute anime looking thing. It's 3D environments with 2D sprites, and your character, when you push the run button to kind of run, quote unquote, he doesn't run. He just does like a hurried walk. And they say, do that when you don't want to talk to anybody, and it's a way to avoid random encounters. So he's like hurriedly walking past everyone as he's like not making eye contact or whatever. It's so cute and hilarious, but also tragic.
Alex Kidd's in the game. He got demoted to working the retail shop for
Oh
Sega.
no, poor Alex Kidd.
Alex Kidd. I mean, I the first boss I encountered was literally Yu Suzuki.
Alex Kidd is the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit to Sonic's Mickey.
Yes.
Yeah, so hopefully, look, I can see why this game took so long. I can see why so many fan translation projects have just broken against its rocky shores. But it would be really neat. I think it could actually be a pretty important one, because it's, you know, with all the talk we have about game development culture these days, and I think at least in in a lot of places in the world it's getting better. But I think it would be really, really poignant if we could see what this thing's about.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have a honorable mention?
Yeah. So I want to mention Berwick Saga for the PlayStation 2. It has a longer name than that, but I'm not going to go into that. But Berwick Saga, if you look that up, you'll find it. So this was the last game officially released by Shozo Kaga, who is the creator of the Fire Emblem series. And this came out after he had left Intelligent Systems and created a game called Tearing Saga for the PlayStation 1, which is basically a Fire Emblem game in all but name, and then got sued by Nintendo, and they had a huge legal battle over that. So
Nintendo, get off it.
I like that I looked it up, and the first two links is for the Fire Emblem Wiki and Serenus Forest.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the fan translation for both Tearing Saga and Berwick Saga were organized on Serenus Forest. But Berwick Saga is really interesting because it's kind of Kaga's magnum opus. So it's a turn-based strategy RPG, just like the Fire Emblem games. But this takes place on actually like a hex grid, and the maps are really and the maps are really big, kind of like Genealogy of the Holy War, and they have multiple objectives on each map, and you have like a hub city that you're in, and you can take different missions and then go out and on those missions for different battles. There's a lot of different like characters you can recruit and optional kind of paths to go down and everything in the story. It's a super intricate, interesting game, and anybody who's a Fire Emblem fan should definitely check it out.
Ben, maybe you can send me like a link of whether like the translation site so that I can legitimately acquire a copy of the game and play a legitimate legal backup of it.
Yes, I will send you a link.
I'm very intrigued.
Well, speaking about that, just before we go, I just want to say a couple of words about, oh God, this sounds like the end of like a 1980s. We've had a lot of fun tonight, but seriously, seriously, emulation is theft.
Smoking is bad.
We've been talking a lot and joking around about emulation and ROMs and things like that. And it's a very thorny thing to get into in terms of the legality of it and the morality of it. However, I don't think that you can have this conversation about video game fan translations without getting a little bit into emulation, as we've been talking about. Emulation, undoubtedly, regardless of which side you're on, has been the most valuable tool for game preservation in history. If it wasn't for emulation, if it wasn't for emulation, so much of video game history would have been lost. In the West, in the East, it doesn't matter. And in terms of fan translations, there would be no way for us to have played many of these games if not for emulation. And frankly, if emulation hadn't existed, if Final Fantasy V had not been available in that fan translated form, I don't know if we would have gotten it for the PlayStation. I don't know what video game history, and especially RPG history, would look like without emulation today. And I think part of the reason why it's so important is because of fan translations.
And much in the same way that fan translations are so amazing and run by passionate people. You know, these all the legitimate emulators that you should be using are open source, they're fan driven, and they're incredible technical achievements. And now there's like FPGA stuff coming out. There's all kinds of advancement going on there.
The
and
like HD mode 7 is like so cool.
Yeah.
So it looks less crunchy on your screen and actually turns pixels around without looking stupid. It's so good.
They just released the Metal Gear Solid quote unquote master collection, and you can get Metal Gear Solid 1 running way better, with more frames, looking better, playing better through emulation.
Yeah.
There's a lot to say about it in terms of video game preservation, in terms of it's, in many cases, the best way to play these games is through emulation.
I think it's exciting that the recent Trails of people have been basically hired up to, help out with a lot of these big Falcom projects.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine? I love Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. If I did not have access to fast forward, I would not last an hour.
And save states.
and save states. Oh my gosh. I'm a busy person. I do not have time to not have save states. I don't care. I'm using those save states.
You see that in current modern day consoles, how they've adapted many of the emulation features for their actual consoles.
You got rewind and stuff. It's so
exactly.
cool.
It's very, very cool. But just in terms of this conversation, fan translations wouldn't exist if not for emulation. I just think we need to acknowledge that. It's a thorny topic, but necessary to acknowledge the importance of it for this topic. Okay, this episode's running a bit long, but there was a lot to talk about. So let's move on to housekeeping right now. So if you are looking for a way to support us here at RPG Fan, we've opened a store. You can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop. I happen to know that we have some additional 25th anniversary merchandise coming out very soon, so keep an eye out for that. If you want to support us here at Retro Encounter, I highly suggest you check out some of our past episodes, including the most recent ones. A few weeks ago, we had our Halloween episode where the panel chatted about their favorite character costumes and outfits. The last episode, I believe these things are recorded in advance, so I think the last episode was favorite side character who could absolutely support their own game, which is a really cool topic.
That's been fun.
Yes.
Yeah. And coming up next week, we have the first part of our Bloodborne episode. So any Souls fan out there, we're doing a Bloodborne episode, and we have Dragon Age Origins coming up in a few months. So keep an eye out for that. We also have Random Encounter, which is another one of our podcasts, which happens to be the one that I host bi-weekly. I can't really tell you what's going on it because it's basically whatever is happening at the time. It's whatever reviews go up on the site, our features, if there's news. It's our current podcast. But if you did want to check out an episode, I highly recommend you check out the Game of the Year Bracket Battle episode that was a few weeks ago. We still have that feature running on the site. I think it will still be running by the time this episode is posted, but I don't host it. Zach's hosting that episode, did a really, really great job. Panel sounds fantastic in it. Audrey, you're on that episode, I know.
Yeah.
And we also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fan's music podcast. Our last episode, I believe, based on the schedule, is going to be focused on game-defining songs, which is a really cool topic. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Retro Encounter, you can fire us off a message at retro@rpgfan.com. If you have any ideas for future episodes, maybe some, any kind of feedback like that, please tell us, or more accurately, tell Solosi, because I don't get that email. That's his, not mine. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on Mastodon at johnologan@mastodon.social. I'm not the only person on this podcast with a social presence on the internet. Audra, where can we find you online?
audra@rpgfan.com.
Cool. And Ben?
benloganlove@gmail.com. I
love that middle name. And Pete?
I don't know. Probably find me on YouTube at Regulation Gaming. I don't really, or Instagram, Regulation Gaming, if you want to never see me post anything.
And Steph?
You can find, quite the opposite, you can find me everywhere at Dice SMS.
Mm-hmm. Or you can also find her at all of our social media.
Yeah, that's right. I'm the social media. So if you found out through this by socials, you found out through me. Or our team, sorry.
Yes, we have quite a social media team. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. You can rate us on iTunes, your other podcast player of choice. Leave us a review. We would love to read them.
Let us know if you try any of these games that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, leave a comment in your Podcast Addict app, please. What translations are you playing now?
I very irregularly host Retro Encounter, and whenever Slowsy gives me an opportunity to do it for a weird topic that I want to talk about, like whether it be this or the Star Trek episode, and I get to do something stupid like I did off the top of this episode, I always appreciate it. So thank you for joining me on this slightly experimental episode of Retro Encounter.
It was such a pleasure. It was a deep,
So fun.
deep
It was
privilege.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, super great.
Maybe at some point in the future we'll take a look, I don't know, at favorite fan hacks of RPGs. That would be an interesting topic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I know, Ben. Anyway, I also want to thank everyone out there for joining us tonight. And as Solosi says at the end of every episode, good night and good luck.